Everyday Samurai, Episode 41. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. How are you? Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here, and thank you for participating once again in these explorations of serving humanity through the martial arts and the science of political economy. Recently, James Williams, Sensei of Nami-ryu Aiki Heiho, presented a video on YouTube stating that as the world is responding to the coronavirus pandemic, martial artists have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership, to really put their skills and the character building that goes into the discipline of studying martial arts on display, to remember what self-reliance, resilience that comes from training is all about, being adaptive to situations. And right now, the world needs leaders who are not caught up in playing dirty politics and actually can see things clearly with composure. Fortunately, Williams Sensei was available to expand upon this idea from his video by having a conversation with me. And at his request, there's not a lot of editing that went into this finished podcast, because speed is of the essence during a crisis. Before we jump right into it though, and along those same lines, if you do have time because you can't go out, then the best thing you could be doing is your own self-improvement. Not only training in the martial art and studying the science of political economy, but focusing on fitness, health, well-being, mindset, all these things that go into making you more resilient in the face of crisis, and also determined to be better at the end of this experience when the new normal emerges, whatever that looks like. A lot of that is outside our control, but the things that we can control, we must master so we can bring our best selves forward to face the new day. And one of the best things that you can do is, again, focus on fitness. And one of the smartest workouts on the planet is the Primal Stress program. It's joint mobility, body weight-based fitness, and yoga-based cool down in a comprehensive workout that you can get done in about 40 minutes from anywhere, adding health and resilience, flexibility, and flow so that you can perform in every situation. Check it out at everydaysamurai.life/primal. That's everydaysamurai.life/primal. And with that, I present part one of a conversation with James Williams Sensei on responding to crisis. James Williams Sensei, welcome back to Everyday Samurai.
Nice to talk to you again. Interesting times, but the world's generally interesting, huh? Sometimes more than others.
Indeed, and at this time, you took it upon yourself to put a message out to the world, particularly focused at martial artists, stating that it's an opportunity to use their training and be adaptive to the situation. So perhaps you can expand on what you meant.
Sure. So, And I realize that the majority of martial arts isn't warrior training. We throw those words around a lot, and we throw the word martial art around a lot. But the vast majority of martial arts have nothing to do with war. However, if you're going to train in a system like that, then you should start to take on some warrior attributes. And we're talking noble warrior attributes. And the ability to apply force is one small part of those attributes. Right? So, you're training for things that are difficult and dangerous just by their definition, right? So when I look out there and I see, emotionalism and this is people who are martial artists, and some of them are even teachers, and
there's a lot of them that are buying into the hysteria around coronavirus.
Well, hysteria and the separation, you and I know, if we're in the this is who we're fighting with, right? We can't change the commander. We can't change all this. It's just, this is the way it is. So we bring it together and we come together and we make it work, even if the whole thing's a sandwich, right? We're going to pull together and make it work or not. So when I see a lot of really blatant emotionalism, political posts and stuff, I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, let's grow up. Right? If you train and you're supposed to be these things, then you need to act like it. And I'm not saying that everybody's like this by any stretch, but you train for difficulty, and this isn't difficulty. This is mildly, inconvenient compared to true difficulty. And danger is mild, comparatively speaking, as well. When we're talking, martial art. Mars was the god of war. War is about killing people and breaking things. It's done with tools. Art's ability to do it with somebody not having it done back to you, but you're training for things where situations are going to be extreme and you need to be calm. You need to be information focused. You need to be able to, perceive through all of the deception of the environment, of your own emotions, of your enemy you're supposed to be able to perceive through all of this and come up with what's really happening. Because if you don't, how are you going to solve that problem? You're not going to be able to solve that problem because you don't even know what it is. So this is a perfect opportunity. And then set the example for people. Most people, and this always aggravates people, but most people are sheeple when things get difficult. I always tell my students there's some great, books to read on things. Amanda Ripley's The Unthinkable is a great one about 9/11. And it was really a valuable book for me because it helped me to, I don't know if understand, but at least see how people react. The majority of people react when something like that takes place. And they have no paradigm for it. And they've not built themselves or trained themselves on how to handle it. And so fear and all of that is the order of the day. And people are moved by the fears. And so, our press, which is reprehensible, and is not interested in information and basically fear mongers. They sell fear. I mean, they're all over the place with crap that is not beneficial to the situation. Now, you and I'm looking at, okay, here's a situation. Timing is very interesting, especially for particular groups of people. Okay. I'm talking politically, economically, and everything else like that. Okay, so, what's happening? Why is it happening? How come we're responding the way we're responding? Who's taking advantage of the situation for their own ends, right? And when you listen to people, especially in politics, that have ideologies like never let a crisis go to waste. Oh, that's interesting. So it's okay to take advantage of people when they're under duress, right? And the one that they don't speak out about as often is like, well, the end justifies the means. I said, oh, how very Marxist-Leninist. I mean, you and a noble warrior should not have that in our hearts. The end does not justify the means.
That's the battle cry of all tyrants.
Yes, right. Doesn't that right? For the good of the people. For the good of the people is the paean of tyrants that goes way back, like 3,000 years. So when I'm observing things like this, I'm immediately skeptical, right? Because there's money to be made here. There's money to be pushed around. I mean, I guess the Kennedy Center would be a great one. Yeah, give them $25 million. They lay their people off and then give the Democratic National Committee back $5 million. I'm sorry. Is there something wrong with this picture? And I'm sure that's just one of many. How about a bunch of senators on both sides of the aisle? These primarily un-Republican who all of a sudden dumped their stock and told all the people who fund them to dump their stock and bring the stock market down. So when you see things like this and you've been out in the big world enough and peeked under the bed and under the covers, you know that there's a lot more going on with situations like this than just a simple, hey, do your protocols, which you should be doing your protocols.
Can you describe your protocols?
Yeah, I mean, I stay at home. I've got, right now, I'm home alone. I've got a big house. I've got my own gym. I've got my own library. I've got plenty of work to do. I've got plenty of food. I've got plenty of everything. There's a creek 50 yards behind the house. That's pretty free running, and I've got water purification regardless. So I don't go out very often. And I'm careful when I do. I keep hand sanitizer with me and just normal protocols that you would in environments where, there's a lot of nasty stuff.
But those are all policies that you put into place well ahead of time because you had strategic foresight.
Well, yes, because, when you don't live in a bubble and you get out a bit and you study and you want to learn, I mean, as Miyamoto Musashi said a long time ago, strategy is the craft of the warrior. Okay, well, what does strategy mean? Right? By the way, don't look at the last 19 years because you're not going to see any strategy that I can find. You know where I'm talking about.
We should examine those 19 years and look at the policy failures and then learn from them.
Yeah, well, if we would have learned from this after the First World War, we wouldn't have been in all this. That's a whole other story altogether. We don't learn. That's the deal. Individuals may learn, but the group doesn't learn. And that includes the military, that includes the government, that includes all of this. So the study of strategy means the study of history. It's a study of culture. It's a study of religion. It's a study of politics. You know, if you're looking back in there, you need to look at both sides. You know, when I was a kid and I read Caesar's Gallic campaigns, starting in Latin, except I spent too much time in the Mother Superior's office, so my parents had to move me to a public school, which was a lot better, and the wrestling team was better too. You know, and when you look at it just from the Roman point of view, what a phenomenal thing that he accomplished. When you look at it from the Celtic point of view, it's a Holocaust, right? It's devastating for those cultures. So if you're going to study these things and you want to really know, you have to really dig deep. What happened on the battlefield is a small part of all of that. And so you have to understand people. You have to understand their training, the resilience of this population or that population, their religious beliefs. All kinds of things come into this study of strategy. So whether you punch or kick or use a sword better or this is a small part of warrior training, actually. If you're looking at it from a classical perspective, and I'm a classicist from that for all kinds of reasons. So when you do, and you look at history, and you look at, you know, Epimenides and the Battle of Lectra and the Theban campaign, well, you know, long warfare like that isn't going to work out. You could look at many other things that have happened in history.
Isn't that what Sun Tzu talked about, that there's never been a benefit to an army contending or a protracted campaign? True victory is swift victory.
Yes. And best victory is not without using force of arms, you know, and you know, force of arms has a very limited tactical application. There's a really good book by a British general. It'll come to me in a second. The Utility of Force, you know. So no different than this. It's humorous, of course, to all of us who have been watching this going on for a long time. All the people that all of a sudden had to run to a gun store, like the ones that had to run to get toilet paper, and then they got to run to a gun store because all of a sudden, all of the delusions that they've been going with, you know, all of a sudden, you know, the bubble's been burst, and they think the gun is actually going to make them safe. And you and I know guns don't make you safe. It's a tool. Right now, sometimes the tool is a necessary one, and this is probably a good time to have the ability to defend yourself, your home, especially if things got a little more sideways. At this point, it's pretty benign, except those places where they're letting criminals out.
You're right. Direct policy contrary to the well-being of the community.
Yes, we're going to close the gun stores. We're going to let criminals out. Thank you very much. And then they find out that, you know, a lot of places like California, you got to wait 10 days. And you can only buy one every 30 days, and you can only buy this much ammunition. You got to do all this. And they're all of a sudden screeching about it. And it's like the connection between reality and most people is a tenuous one. They live in the bubble. They listen to things like the news, which is not about information.
That's right. Paid programming.
They get the sports scores right most of the time, and the weather right some of the time, but that's about it. You know, the bias and the lack of veracity in journalism is just rife. So if you listen to that stuff, then you don't know anything, and you're being programmed the whole time, like you say.
Let me ask you something specifically regarding your approach to martial art, which is very tools-based. Yes, you have empty-handed stuff, and you have a boxing background, etc. However, you focus on the sword and the edged weapon engagement. And it's similar to firearms, particularly personal firearms, and familiarity with those tools. Would you say grants you a certain perspective, a certain insight, because you understand how a blade cuts? You also understand a little bit more about situations.
So, and this is an interesting thing. And, you know, one of the things I normally go if I'm going to train, especially, you know, say special operators, if they haven't worked with me before, is, you know, when I But I start things off, and I'm going to kind of give them an orientation. I pull up a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I take one of my swords and I cut it right in half just with a little whisper. And I go, who's tough? Right? Who's tough? I get no answers. I point to the edge of the blade. Veritas. This is the truth. Now we're defining our training. It's not MMA. It's not BJJ, basically Japanese judo. It's not karate. It's not kung fu. It's not something you train empty-handed and then pick up a tool and put in it. Every single movement and all your strategy is defined by the lethality of this sword, which you just saw whisper through that paper, and it'll go right through the biggest arm and the biggest torso here. So now our whole orientation is different, right? I was a champion kickboxer in the 70s, and I wasn't beaten. They found people I could beat. I don't know how they did that, but, and it wasn't because I wasn't afraid. We've talked about this, because I was afraid of failure. And that drove me. And if you hurt me, it just brought me closer to failure. I mean, so I fought harder. It brought me closer to my fear. So hurting me didn't help. But in the big world, if you're taking rounds or you're taking sword cuts, you're not going to survive that. Chances are high. So you have to reorient yourself completely to what are we doing here? Exchanges of force and all the things that make up the vast majority of what we call martial arts aren't acceptable here. It means a lot of body bags. I buried a lot of guys in 1968, and I'm still end up at funerals for guys. So your whole orientation to the art is different, and the high-level classical samurai arts are completely different. They're so much more different than people realize. So when I look at situations now, I don't even look at them the same way anymore. I look at them from a completely different orientation.
Would you find that someone that did not orient on a samurai-related art but focused on pistol craft or firearms in general, personal firearms more specifically, would get those similar types of insights?
No.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Now, the people who get similar insights are a pretty small group of people. Can't discuss that kind of stuff.
But you know them very well.
I can discuss it peripherally, shall I say. Okay. Those are the people that get that, but this is their life, right? And they don't just go into combat zones. They're the kind of people that in 2017, in 4 months, basically crushed ISIS in Syria when we got different rules of engagement because of a change in POTUS. Okay. 15 of those guys in 4 or 5 months killed about 6,000 of those guys using all kinds of methodologies. Didn't lose anybody. Those guys have a very similar outlook. Now, they don't have the same kind of training. That's why I can help them. And I think we've discussed this years ago, doing a training iteration, and went out they wanted to do scenario training one day and went out to another part of the compound and had a SUV. And the scenario was, it's Beirut, Lebanon, middle of the day, middle of the street, snatch and grab. So 2 cars block me in front and back. 2 guys out on the driver's side, 1 on the passenger side to keep them from getting weapons. It's taken about 90 seconds to get the guy out of the car and back into the van and get down the street. In environments like that, right around 45, 50 seconds, things are starting to collapse on you. So the situation is becoming more complicated. And they asked me, well, sir, what would you do? And by myself, I got the guy out of the car in 15 seconds because my whole orientation and training is different. It's not strength and leverage oriented. For us, leverage isn't sophisticated. A true soft style. And a lot of people use these words. I just don't see it very often. Okay. So words like Aiki and soft get used by some modern arts.
Relaxation's another one.
Yeah. I don't know what they mean by that, but it's not what we mean by that, because what I'm doing and what they're doing is not the same thing. And my stuff will function. Doesn't matter who it is, when it is, where it is. And the other stuff is really more of a different kind of practice now, maybe with some self-defense and stuff, applications to it, but certainly not what was done a long time ago. So, a deep study of those classical arts is a deep study of yourself ultimately as well, because you really have to go internal and make changes on yourself. I tell my students, you're becoming the conscious architect of your consciousness. Most martial arts take advantage, whatever you have, physical gifts, etc. And most of your programming is done by the time you're 6 or 7 years old, how you orient towards life. And they're using that. And
you're talking physically as well as mentally.
Physically, mentally, everything. I don't access my body the same way when I'm doing this. It's not normal. It's easier for me to show that, why I got the guy out of the car so fast or other things like that. But when I talk about it, it doesn't mean anything to people because the only paradigm they have is what they know, and this is not that. And it's actually the whole reason for the training in classical arts, as Kuroda Sensei would say.
And that's Kuroda Tetsuzan for those who are not familiar.
Kuroda Tetsuzan, yes, who has the highest level of classical movement that I've seen or been experienced to, and I've trained with him for over 20 years. And I started this type of training another 20 years before that.
Well, it's interesting. I have his peculiar techniques of training method on Vimeo download or on video on demand, alongside with your Vimeo on demand program. But I also saw you in Japan training with Tetsuzan Sensei, and very fascinating approach to studying.
Yeah, you have to feel what's happening. You can't see it. You can see the outside physical movement, but how it's done is not how it looks like it's done. Okay, so there's the difficult thing with this type of training. And when I do my boxing videos, well, I can relate. People can get that for the most part, right? But when I'm doing the other stuff, you can't see how actually is happening. You have to touch me. I'll have to touch you, and you'll feel how different it is, especially me, because I'm a big guy. And I'm still a very fit, muscled big guy. So people think that I'm doing it with muscle, and I'm not at all. I'm not at all. And you have to feel it for that to be the case. And then the deception of movement is another fundamental aspect, that what the person sees and what you're doing isn't the same thing. And it's not an external mind see. Your body's programmed deep into your brain. You couldn't walk, you couldn't go up and down stairs, you couldn't ride a bicycle. So what you're working on that, where the person is going to react a particular way because of what they're perceiving, and it doesn't hit the conscious mind at all. So I could even explain, this is what I'm going to do, bump, bump, and I can do it, and you can't stop it because the programming is that deep. And that's the deception, and why people spent such a long period of time trying to gain that. Even in the old days, I think it was a small percentage of people, but it changes everything. When I used to go down to Coronado and work with some of the guys at Trade at Naval Special Warfare, one of the most common things I'd get is, well, you're so fast, sir. And I go, well, it's not that I'm fast. I'm not doing very much, so it doesn't take much time. And what you're perceiving isn't what's happening. So we move, and you've got a knife at your throat, and it seems like it happened instantaneously. Okay? And a lot of those fundamental Koryu principles, like attack and defense is one, kobuitai. There's no separation. There's no blocking back and forth. We don't have blocks. We don't block punches. We don't block swords. In Nami-ryu, we don't have any blocks.
Because it's fruitless to try to block a edged weapon with anything the physical body can demonstrate.
The physical body, but we don't block swords with swords. Okay? We don't block swords. We don't have any blocks.
You have deflections, though.
Some deflections, but that is on a lower level. Then what you're looking at is otonashi no kachi, right? You're looking at a silent victory, no touching of blades. So and this is an interesting study, and I'm actually working on a book right now. I've got a publishing company interested, and it's not going to be a martial arts book, but it is going to be what this deep study and all the inner work I had to do, and I'm still doing. You never end this, as far as I can see. Make sure you empty the glass in the morning so you have plenty of room for putting new stuff in. I don't like that master thing or all this. This study is so deep that just because I know a whole lot more about it than even my best students doesn't mean mastership. So we don't not allowed anybody to use those words. I'm a student as well in the process. Okay. But because of that, right around 65, I started noticing that my aging process was a lot different. It's a lot different than my siblings who are both younger than me. It's a lot different. I'm like, well, why would this be? I work out reasonably, but I'm not a fanatic. There's people that are far more disciplined than I am. I watch my diet and my weight, and I do this, but this training and what you have to do on the inside is hugely beneficial for the aging process. We don't realize what tension in our body caused by fears does to us over time, but it's extraordinarily damaging to us. And you can see it in people. You can see the burdens they're carrying. You see all the tensions in their movements. You can see their posture and how they get it. So that's probably a whole nother study than today's thing. So I'm really digging into this because I think this will help and reach more people. The number of people that are going to want to spend the time it takes to gain real capability in an art like this is not very many, I think. However, the people I can help with, the people I might be able to reach with some of the things that I've learned from all this for their own health and well-being, that's another thing altogether.
It's a matter of adaptation that was compelled because the physical body is no match to sharp steel.
It is, yet this is not that common, even in the old days. This is not as common as you would think. And when I look at some of the Kodyu out there, I don't see this in it. Now, I think there is in some of it, and certainly Kuroda Sensei, from his standpoint, manifests that, but people fought with steel on lower levels throughout history. It was just that certain, I think in a sense fortunate. I was searching, but fortunate to run into the people that I did in the process.
Certainly, the quality of Koryu in Japan even has declined, especially in recent years.
Well, because it's not a warrior society anymore.
That's right.
They don't fight and do all these things, right? So, and even then, the majority.
Well, I think you're hitting on something very important because we started this conversation with what a warrior culture can do in the face of a coronavirus or some other public health emergency. And it's these adaptations that are compelled by facing the edged weapon. And sometimes I've seen you train by whipping your students to, adapt and allow that energy to flow through. And those are all practices that help you deal with a new perspective and orienting on problems.
So here's the big conundrum in the human condition, and it's fear. Okay. And so one of the things I bring up about the kickboxing was just the fact that, I was successful, but I was fear-driven, fear of failure. So hurting me only brought me closer, like throwing gasoline on a fire. But that's a real low. You can't go very far in life with that, fear of failure. Now, people do, and they get rich and everything, but their lives are contracted and constricted, right? So this is the human condition with fear. So in Nami-ryu, we have fear, which is normal behavior. That's how people normally move, and we have faith, which is a completely different access that we're looking at. The fear and faith part, and I don't mean belief systems. The faith's not a belief. It's not a belief in the martial art. It's not a belief in a religion. It's a different thing. Okay, we live in a universe of order, and what could we get into some of the modern discoveries on all of that? And we live in a universe that we can perceive. It's a cause and effect universe that we can depend on. We depend on oxygen transfer. We depend upon gravity. And this is a deep faith thing. There'd be nothing without those things. So that's when we talk about faith, that's what we're talking about. So instead of using contractile strength, instead of using, all this, energy and the, in anger and all the stuff that people use to do this, we're using something else altogether. We're using, in one sense, in the beginning, say a simple energy thing would be kinetic energy. So I'm releasing kinetic energy. I'm not driving and pushing off the ground and all of this that I used to do when I boxed. So I'm actually, a lot of those things are different than when I boxed. Some of the stuff I'm putting out there because I see mistakes being made even at pro boxing levels that it cost guys things. And the one championship fight between Comey and Lopez was a classic example of who threw the right hand properly. They both did the same thing at the same time. Lopez slid off to the side behind his left. Comey didn't. Cost Comey his championship. So those are relatively simplistic things in that sense of the term. But this is a real inner rewiring. And you have to deal with all kinds of things and your biases and all kinds of stuff that you accept as normal or think they're the way they are. So right now when we see people reacting to fear and being hurted by fear, right? And politicians are, tend to do this, and the press, if that's all they tend to do, right? So once that can take place, if that can hit you, you need work, right? Now, most people, they don't think about it, right? They actually think opinions are something of value, right? I like it from Epictetus. Man is not disturbed by things, but by his opinions of things. I always tell my students, my outlook on opinions are like bowel movements. They're really important to the person that's having one, and nobody else is interested in yours. So what we have is you can watch people just back and forth, and then the blaming, and then the separation, and then the character, and all of this stuff go on. It's like, whoa. If you want people to come together for something like this, you can't do it by separating them, except if you're going to apply an outside external force on these people, right? So the more fear-oriented you are and the more separated you want to be, the more you're going to put yourself in a position like the Chinese people when they decide they're going to close something down or close down information.
I was going to say, is that really the Chinese people, or is that the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, they don't have a choice. The Communist Party does that. They don't have a choice. What happened to the doctors that were speaking up? They're just gone all of a sudden, and it's not just naivete in the press. There's so much money involved in all of this stuff. And anybody that doesn't think that people in power in government, etc., isn't following the money and protecting all of that, like the senators, who dumped the stocks and told all the people that give them money. I would say politicians have 3 directives: get elected, get reelected, and take care of the people that give you money.
That is the ruler's dilemma.
Where do we fit in that?
Right.
And it's gone far, far with this. I mean, government is an entity unto itself. People think, well, you're just paranoid. I'm like, when I was asked about, family members asked me about Jeffrey Epstein. And I said, he'll never see trial, and then you'll never see the black book. Oh, you're just a conspiracy guy.
Yeah. How'd that work out?
Because listen, I mean, when people die around people of power and influence that knew something about them, it's not a coincidence. If you spent time, and most people have no clue about it, but if you spent time under the covers, you know that that's the case. The people who can shape the world to themselves. This is what they do. Okay. Now, a lot of that, most of that's way beyond my sphere of influence, but I recognize it, so I can see it. So it's easy for me to see, if this goes this way, probably this is what's going to happen. Or this person won't be heard from, or that thing will be past the news cycle so fast you won't even know.
Well, this is why I advise all martial artists to study the science of political economy, because it is Bunbu Ryodo, right? The sword and brush as one, and the dual path of scholarly and martial arts. So we study sword-based martial systems to give us the physical and the other mental benefits thereof, but the science of political economy allows us to see the larger environment around us. And again, as you said, follow the money and understand that, yes, government and those in government are the largest special interest group in the world. derive their living through taxation, and we should be understanding of their incentive structure. And that's what public choice economics is all about.
And notice how many of them get rich. Check their salaries and notice how many of them worth tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars. How'd they get that money? What are they selling?
You made mention earlier about the people that did the sell-off of their stocks right before the crash.
Yep.
How did they have that, and why aren't they in jail for insider trading?
Do you not, and I ask people, do you think that Jeffrey Epstein did not have stuff on major world leaders that could be used to influence their policies? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
And people are like, well, that's so. I said, it's not even far-fetched. It's just how it works. And this is nothing new. And he's not unique. So when I look at warrior, the thing here, one, calm in the face of danger, right? Okay. It's going sideways. Be calm. Okay. Like my student, Jeff, who's, one of my top Nami-ryu students, the dojo here we have together. His second year.
Yeah, he's a professional dog trainer, right?
Well, he doesn't work in that anymore. I mean, he has that. He has, one in Africa and one here. But second year is part of the Karzai counter sniper team in Afghanistan protecting Ahmed Karzai. He was elected president. I mean, not president, excuse me. He was elected team leader. And this is their former Delta Sergeant Majors on that team. And he was elected team leader because he's just one of these guys. When stuff goes sideways, man, he's just calm and the guy everybody looks to. Okay. Well, that's what you're looking to be. And you need the example. The calm leader not only makes the best decisions for everybody, but he keeps everybody else calm. And if we're supposed to be doing all this training, we should be the ones being calm. We should be the ones telling people, hey, we need to pull together. It's not time for politics, not time for partisanship. Time to set an example, right? It's also a time, if risk has to be taken, we should be taking that risk, right? I mean, bushi, right? The Japanese word for warrior, to stop the spear, to stop with the spear. Okay. If you're training, if you consider yourself a warrior, well, your job is to protect and defend. It's the Setsunin Tokatsu Jinken. It's the sword that cuts down evil, right? The killing sword, Satsujinken, that gives life. Modern martial arts, especially certain we could talk about, they really like Katsujinken, the sword that gives life. It sounds so fine. And for our scroll all those years ago when Kondo Sensei he was the fourth Shoto master, Masami-san helped me out of Kyoto when I was trying to get him to write those characters. I couldn't get anybody to write Satsujinken, and so I wrote him a long letter and I said, Sensei, if the sword cannot cut down evil, there is no life-giving sword. You have to be able to protect and defend. And so he wrote that, and then he wouldn't charge us. So now I have all this giri, right? And what we did is Jim O'Connell came up with the idea. We got a Navajo shaman who carved a soapstone peace pipe. And so we flew to Kyoto and Osaka we flew to and presented that to Kondo Sensei. But this is how we define ourselves. I'm not training for my own personal protection. I conceal carry every day, right? And I don't conceal carry because I'm personally afraid. The vast majority of the time, one, nothing's going to happen, but I can also perceive those things way better than the average person and not be in the position. But what if something happens and I can't help?
That's the approach that we offer here at Everyday Samurai, is that training in a martial art is a civic obligation. It's not just for you, it's for society at large.
It's exactly. The warrior's not gaining that for himself. And he's not even cutting down the enemy for hatred of the enemy. That way leads to a lot of PTSD and other problems. We're cutting down the enemy because of the people we love that we're protecting, right? So if I go down in the fight, but I protected, well, then I did my job. If I go down in the fight and I didn't, well, then I didn't do my job. Why not? Was I not training? Because it becomes not about you, right? If it's about you, that's a different study. And I have nothing wrong with that. Listen, I did that. I wrestled, I boxed, I kickboxed, karate, kung fu, arnis, and eskrima. I did BJJ. I did my grandkids are still doing it. My son Christopher's still involved. Great sport, good thing for them. All those are good. I'm not against those, and I'm not speaking negatively about them. They're just, you need to know what your study, what is it really, and where are its limitations.
And what's its use, higher value use?
Yes, when I see people that are teaching a sport, telling people that this is going to be the best thing for them out on the street, because that, and I know that's not true, that's reprehensible. You need to, it's your responsible what you teach people. I teach people who are going into harm's way. Where they go, someone's going to die. It's not even a possibility. It's an absolute. That's their job. So I need to check myself constantly, make sure that what I'm teaching is helping them.
Well, this question is something that might be a little further afield than the discussion that we intended to set out on. However, but there is, especially in those samurai-related martial arts that are trying to compete in a crowded marketplace with people that are interested in the sporting aspects, and they're trying to adapt. You're someone that has held the line.
Yes.
Because you stay focused on the edged weapon aspect of it. And how do you keep that?
Well, because I'm staying on the war part. Okay. Now I've been doing martial arts over 60 years, not counting going to Catholic school with the Irish in the 50s. Okay. Where I learned a lot. And I was a small kid growing up. I had glasses. I couldn't see when they got knocked off. I had a lot of drive to be better. Okay. But this is a very different study. It gives you way more as well. It gives you more for your life and everything, because the study is so deep and you have to work on yourself so much. Okay. But the difference between lethality and not is massive. It's just a completely different study. And I look at some of the knife styles and stuff where these guys are going back with small tools, and I'm thinking, you're going to cut the shit out of each other. I mean, you could be killing each other and not even know it. I mean, I've been cut in situations like that, not even know I was cut, right? Fortunately, it wasn't a place where the leaking couldn't be stopped, right? But it's you're going down a different path that way. And I don't have a problem with that path, but know what you're doing and what the efficacy of it is.
Well, and there's a lot of money flowing to those sporting aspects.
Well, and that's all fine. Listen, it's great. Listen, I would have loved, when I was kickboxing, we could do takedowns. We couldn't fight on the ground. But Frank Scalercio Jr., who's best martial artist nobody's ever heard of, his putting together of the boxing from Bobo Olsen, world middleweight champ, and his Tang Soo Do training. He lived in Korea for 8 years, was married to a Korean in the military. And Frank was just a talented martial artist, but a really smart guy besides. Putting that stuff together, and he's had his kids wrestling and got me jobs, with my first wrestling coaching jobs, because the coaches weren't doing a good job. I had a great time with it, by the way. I loved coaching wrestling. But Frank's going, hey, people can take you down the street. We need to do something here. Right. So we added all of those things in. I would have been involved in M&A when I was that age. I would have loved all that stuff. And it's all good. It's just different. So when I'm teaching people on the boxing thing, well, that's a whole different deal. I'm talking about stuff like, hey, you can't be doing this like you're doing boxing or MMA. You start turning your hands and stuff over like that in the street, you're going to bust them all up. I can speak from experience. I've busted mine more than once. You can see big ridges of broken bones on the back of especially my right hand, from cracking people. So I'm showing them, hey, if you're going to train, there's a reason the old bare knuckle guys didn't turn their hands over the way modern people do. Train in the gym, you're wrapped in tape with gloves on, you go out in the street and you bang on somebody's head. I mean, even Mike Tyson broke his hand on Mitch Green hitting him, right? So, I can help them with stuff like that because that's where they are. I can't teach them the other stuff like that off of a video because it's just not possible. It's a whole different study.
Yet you're also bringing some of the information that you've gathered, particularly from the sword art, into your boxing now.
Yes, well, because the whole thing is, as Kodo Sensei says, people are misunderstanding kata. Kata is not about real fighting. Real fighting changes endlessly. But kata takes you into a different world. So things like, I can't push down against the ground to start and stop. Musoku no ho, no legs. Ukimi, floating body. People say, what? Right? And then I can show them how that works. I can't use any muscle raising my hand up. I can literally turn off my anterior delt when I'm raising my arm up. right? So somebody can hold my arm down, and then when I switch and you can feel the shift in my body, I actually tip them, I actually get to their center, right? And I can do that all kinds of ways, but it took a long time and a lot of work to do that. Now, it's worth it, especially when I look at what I have to work with at my age. I'm like a person 20 years younger than me in almost everything that I do. And a relaxed, fluid person at 20 years, not a stiff, rigid one, right? So there's a lot of advantages to that. Besides the functional advantage is I can still go work with those guys, and physically, a few years after the one car extraction, I was working with some guys, and was sorry, I'm going to resist you this time, getting out of the vehicle, right? No problem. Took me 17 seconds, and he decided he wasn't going to resist again. And I like that. I like being challenged like that by those guys, because I need to know if it's going to work or not. If I can't help them, I need to shut up and sit down. It has nothing to do with the money. It has to do, can I help or not?
Friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai and look forward to seeing you next time. Be sure to subscribe to our feed so you'll always stay up to date with our releases, including our continuing conversation with James Williams Sensei. If you like what you've heard here, be sure to give us a 5-star review on iTunes or the podcatcher of your choosing. Like, share, subscribe, and let a friend know about what we're doing here. Help to build momentum and a culture of enlightened warriors that are willing and ready to secure liberty and advance a free society. Check out the show notes at everydaysamurai.life/41. And while you're there, sign up for the email list so you can stay up to date with our latest offerings. Remember, the Primal Stress Fitness Program is the best way that you can make the most of your time amidst this crisis. So go to everydaysamurai.life/primal. That's everydaysamurai.life/primal. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.